Now, I want to talk about something that I read in the New York Times. So I was opening the New York Times and I said, top FDA official overrode scientists on COVID-19 shots. I thought to myself, who the heck did this? That sounds really bad. First thought was, who did this? This sounds bad. And how come I don't know about it? But then, of course, I read down below and the answer was, apparently I did it. It was me. So I was like, okay, oh wow. So I want to walk through what exactly I have written on this topic because I think it's worth discussing. So one narrative that the media is portraying is that there are many, many vaccine reviewers here who had one point of view and I alone had the other point of view. And the truth is, I suspect we do have some small disagreements among some reviewers and myself. There may be other reviewers who agree with me a little bit more. I think we all have slightly different points of view. But all of our points of view are, I think, informed by science and evidence. And I deeply respect the reviewers who agree with me. I deeply respect the reviewers who disagree with me. And I think this is okay to sometimes, in incredibly contentious topics, have small disagreements. So I'm going to read to you at length some portions of the decisional memo I've put in on the most recent Spikevax kids approval so you can get a sense of why I put the memo in. Okay, I tried to write it, as honestly and in my own voice as possible. So this is how it begins. First of all, I want to thank David Caslow for teaching me how to put that digital signature. I didn't know how to use the software, and he walked me through it. He's very, very helpful. Okay, this memorandum explains CBER's decision on the above submission, which was the Spikevax submission. I've read the reviews and recommendations of the supplemental BLA review team. In addition to those, I've read and reviewed pertinent portions of the sponsor submission, as well as research on this topic in the peer-reviewed literature. The review team has done a commendable job in summarizing and analyzing the submission to date. Nevertheless, I feel differently about certain aspects of their conclusions and instead reached the conclusion described below. I'm going to read you for a few more minutes about what I say. The manufacturer's application, this was Moderna, but this is similar to all of these approvals. The manufacturer's application forces FDA CBER to confront the question, is there substantial certainty of a net clinical benefit, that the benefits outweigh the harms, to vaccinating healthy children with this mRNA vaccine? CBER's OCD's answer, our office's answer, at the present time, with the best available information, is no. At the same time, our answer for children with risk factors is yes. And here's why. At least I think so. Here's why I think so. First, consider that COVID-19 severe disease, hospitalization, and death is extremely low at pediatric ages and has fallen according to the US CDC data from 2021 to present. The rates are lower in healthy kids than kids with risk factors, although notably the CDC data does not permit us to have the specific rate in healthy kids. Notably, the applicant has agreed to a revised submission that focuses on kids with risk factors, and CBER has granted this approval. Second, the applicant has never shown a reduction in severe COVID-19, hospitalization, ICU stays, or death in a randomized trial of children. One reason why this has not been shown in randomized trials is these events are so infrequent, the sample size for such a study would be massive. Although observational studies and case control studies have suggested these endpoints may be improved, those studies have methodologic limitations. Specifically, families who choose to vaccinate kids are fundamentally different than those who don't, and we cannot easily separate the treatment effect from those underlying differences. Case control studies hinge on the fact that cases and controls are sampled from the same underlying population, but this assumption is often incorrect. Third, the applicant has not shown that COVID-19 vaccination reduces long COVID or transmission in any setting at any age with high-quality data. Neither has the applicant nor a third party shown fewer missed days of school with high-quality data. These endpoints cannot be considered for regulatory purposes. The FDA primary review teams have never allowed any company to make these claims about a COVID-19 vaccine, including for this applicant. Fourth, many of the studies the applicant has submitted occurred in a COVID-19 landscape much different than the present day. Whether these studies retain relevance with wider population immunity and mutational changes to the virus is debated. One important factor in vaccinating kids is the fraction who were previously exposed to the virus through normal life. the potential upper bound absolute benefit to a kid who had and recovered from COVID-19 is lower than one who has not been exposed to the virus. Yet, from the darkest hours of the pandemic to today, these rates have changed. Kids have broadly returned to normal life and normal exposures, and many more will encounter COVID-19 as it circulates year-round from the moment of their birth. Vaccinating these individuals, healthy kids who happen to have natural immunity, carries massive uncertainty as to whether benefits outweigh risks. Fifth, although COVID-19 vaccines have been given to billions of individuals and the harms have been studied in depth, no one knows if these products have harms that only materialize 10 or 20 years later, as such is a necessary limit of time. It is ignorant to claim that unknown long-term risks are not possible, which is a claim I thought I saw in the New York Times article. I think that's incorrect. We just don't know. Sixth, much of the applicant's submission concerns immunogenicity, or the body's ability to make antibodies that neutralize the virus. Make no mistake, antibody titers are a surrogate endpoint. They can and do correlate with improved clinical outcomes in some, but not all circumstances. Antibodies are not gold standard science, and one cannot be certain of a net clinical benefit merely because antibodies are increased. The human body does not actively manufacture all antibodies it is capable of producing at all times. I think our blood would turn to molasses. Instead, it mobilizes antibody production from memory cells when appropriate. Vaccine doses can increase antibodies, but fail to further improve clinical outcomes. The proper interpretation of surrogate endpoints is key to understanding this application. CBER has shown flexibility and will accept these surrogate endpoints for children at high risk of severe COVID-19 outcomes, but not for healthy children. Seventh, CBER OCD's risk-based regulatory approach to COVID-19 vaccine is no secret. It's been announced publicly and discussed widely. The CBER OCD and the FDA Commissioner have published the framework in the New England Journal of Medicine, which broadly holds that vaccines for COVID-19 will be made available for elderly individuals and younger individuals with risk factors for severe COVID-19 based on immunogenicity, but that randomized controlled trials measuring clinical outcomes will be required to approve these products for healthy individuals. Eighth, although not a consideration in CBER's decision-making, it is worth noting that the real-world use of COVID-19 vaccines in healthy kids is incredibly low. Rates of vaccination and hospitalization were so low that the CDC was unable to calculate observational vaccine effectiveness data for the 2024 to 2025 season from such thin data. The FDA is ultimately accountable to the American people, and Americans have overwhelmingly stated that they feel the evidence to vaccinate a healthy child with a COVID-19 mRNA product is not enough to compel them to act. I mean, I think it's less than 7%. CBER OCD, after careful examination of the scientific evidence, agrees with the vast majority of Americans. Again, although not a factor in my decision-making, CBER OCD notes that no European peer nation advises healthy children to undergo COVID-19 vaccination, and the US has been a global outlier with its push to vaccinate healthy children with a novel mRNA product, year over year. Finally, last paragraph. FDA has a statutory mandate to only approve products when we have substantial certainty benefits outweigh harms. And in cases we do not, sponsors are free to prove to the agency and the American people the worth of their products with randomized trials. We do not have substantial certainty benefits outweigh risks for healthy children based on the totality of data in this submission and a careful consideration of the biomedical literature. In the meantime, CBER OCD will exercise regulatory flexibility in making products available to kids at high risk of severe disease of COVID-19. So, part of this is also outlined in the framework. So this is not the whole decision note, but I think it's worth reading because it's not a secret, okay? It's not a secret that I put this in. It's not a secret that these are the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. And so we may have disagreements, and I have a lot of respect for the people who I have disagreements with, tremendous respect. And there are places where we may even meet in the middle. And my mind has been changed on a couple of issues by David Kaslow just in the last 2 weeks. And maybe vice versa. I may change a little bit of the mind of some of the people who work here. But I want you to know that when we do have these disagreements, it's not overriding 30 people. It's not coming in here and changing the landscape. It's trying to understand that I think reasonable, thoughtful scientists We'll always disagree about places where the evidence is not a slam dunk, and it's okay to have those disagreements. We should be honest about those disagreements, and I don't want to say proud of those disagreements, but I'm comfortable with being open with you and sharing the exact language from the decisional memo. And of course, we've kind of outlined what we're trying to do here with this framework, which the purpose of the framework is to bring the US in line with European nations and to elevate this debate into higher standards of evidence, because these companies now will face post-marketing commitments to generate randomized controlled trial evidence by the spring. And that evidence can go many different directions. It can go one way or the other way, and based on what it says, we will make the next step. But I also want to say this is not the first time that I think there have been debates on this topic, and I think it's worth just reminding us that this has been a contentious issue all along. The vaccination policies for COVID-19, departing FDA officials and WHO leaders argue against the broad rollout of COVID-19 booster shots. This occurred in the fall of 2021 when Drs. Gruber and Krauss retired from the FDA over disputes with then leadership. And the dispute was, I think, one of two disputes that has come out through congressional testimony and through op-eds. One was the dispute on who precisely needs boosters. Should boosters be justified based on randomized controlled trials powered for clinical endpoints? And the other substantive area of disagreement at the time with leadership was what should be the conditions for transitioning EUA to the Biological Licensing Agreement, the BLA, which occurred in the fall of 2021. That regulatory decision was critical because without that BLA, a number of legal scholars believed we could not have had a vaccine mandate. So that BLA was needed for the compulsory mandates that were extremely contentious. And this was the crux of the disagreements then. And at the time this happened, this is myself, Tracy, and the commissioner, and many others, we were extremely critical of these mandates, particularly in young men, because our modeling suggested a large increased risk of the number of hospitalizations prevented with COVID-19 would be far smaller than the number of myocarditis cases that occurred with COVID-19. We have some modeling for the recent safety label update, and we may find out more, and I'll present to you all when we're ready to make our decision on that. But this is an important issue. The FDA has to always respond to situations where we may inadvertently have approved products for some subpopulations where the benefits exceed harms. And we have thought this and modeled this from the very get-go. And then the other thing I want to say is, we may forget, there have been so many other controversial COVID-19 vaccine choices over the last few years that have happened. And just to maybe remind us all, the Johnson & Johnson shot and the AstraZeneca shot, which are adenoviral vector shots, they had a rare adverse event identified, which was vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia and thrombosis, or VIT. It's a lot like heparin-induced thrombocytopenia and thrombosis, which is a runaway platelet activation syndrome. I don't want to just call it a clot. I don't think HIT is just a clot. It is runaway platelet activation, even in the setting of some profound anticoagulants. The J&J shot initially presented with a number of young women who had cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. I've taken care of such patients who've had CVT. Some of them have herniated their brain and died. It is not a trivial side effect. The initial rates put it at 1 in 40,000. The news media covered this and said the risk for a young girl getting this shot is less than for taking an oral contraceptive. But to me, that was incredibly dishonest, because the clot you get from taking an oral contraceptive is in the calf muscle, resolves with anticoagulation, and this is something that results in some women herniating their brain, catastrophic clot. And ultimately, the manufacturers of these products, so the FDA regulatory history, we put a pause on it in 2021. That pause was lifted. It continued for another couple of years. The administration did not want to take strong action against it, worried that it'll cause vaccine hesitancy. Ultimately, the companies of both of these products not only shelved the products, they shelved the entire manufacturing platform underlying the products, understanding these risks are catastrophic. I personally felt in 2021 that it would be wrong to take a 20-year-old woman and give her a J&J shot when she could get a Pfizer shot, that it's just unacceptable risk to put someone through. Myocarditis, which I've talked about in this forum, the risk of that and how we've dealt with it at FDA, I think there's been a number of places where there has been substantive debate. I think the BLAs, particularly the rush in 2021 to move Pfizer to BLA to allow mandates, and I think the entire strategy of boosters for everyone forever is something that is contentious and has been debated since the very beginning. And the last thing I want to talk about is the initial statistical analysis plan, because you may not know this. This was an article that came out in the MIT Technology Review. It's called One Doctor's Campaign to Stop a COVID-19 Vaccine Being Rushed Before Election Day. This is 2020. Now, you may remember in the summer of 2020, Donald Trump was campaigning, and one of his pledges was that the COVID-19 vaccine would be approved in October. Why did he think October? Well, this is an O'Brien-Fleming stopping boundary, so that's part of the answer. Why did he think October? Well, in this large randomized controlled trial being run by Pfizer, the 40,000-person randomized controlled trial, the primary endpoint of the study is symptomatic SARS-CoV-2. You have symptoms, we swab you, we send the swab in. If the PCR detects COVID-19, it counts as an event. That's the primary endpoint. It's a blinded study, so the company is just every day getting a packet with a swab, and they're testing. And they're getting 1 event and 2 events and 4 events, and they know the rate with which they're getting events. So they have a sense at what point they're going to get 32 events, 64 events, 74 events, and they know when that date is going to come. And of course, they're going to share with the president when they think that date is going to come. And the initial statistical analysis plan of the Pfizer vaccine study specified that at 32 events, the study will be paused and unblinded, and we'll look at the results. And if you have 32 positive COVID-19 cases, and 26 are in the control arm, and 6 are in the intervention arm, 26-6, 27-5, 28-4, you have surpassed the O'Brien-Fleming stopping boundary, the statistical Z function, and you have halted this study. Okay, so this is the classic sequential analysis of randomized control trials we see all the time. Pre-specified 32 event look, extremely skewed Z-score, 26-6 is an extremely skewed Z-score, but of course you need a more skewed Z-score with fewer events than you do with more events at less of a Z-score, ultimately approaching on that negative 1.96 and positive 1.96 that we think of for the nominal significant p-value. Okay, so this is the plan. But because of extreme pressure on the company from people who knew that that 32 event mark was going to occur in mid-October, the company halted the testing of the swabs, filed a protocol amendment to alter 32 to 64, which requires a different skew, and ultimately did not perform the analysis until they had something in the 90s, 90 number swabs, which occurred in November, right after the election. Now, why was the initial statistical analysis plan changed? Was it changed for a scientific reason, a medical reason, a statistical reason? As somebody who's been a professor of epidemiology and in medicine for 20 years, I cannot see any scientific or medical basis to change the statistical plan. In fact, it's a different ratio, it's still on the O'Brien-Fleming stopping boundary, and it doesn't give you greater credibility. And in fact, every time you change a statistical analysis plan, to some degree you insert alpha error and you insert sort of errors. So in my mind, if somebody wants to say, when was the first moment that politics played a role in this process, I think it was the initial release date. And if I were to also say that winter was a very terrible winter, and if had the vaccine been available 5 weeks sooner, based on the initial statistical analysis plan, which I think would have hit, I think a lot of people's lives would have been saved. So we may be talking about tens of thousands of lives. So to me, this is the original sin, this moment in time. And since then, we've had a number of debates, and I just want you to know that I think these debates are, at least going forward, will always be motivated in science and evidence, even if they were not always in the past. Okay, I was going to talk about a cancer example, but I don't want to go on and on. I want to leave it right here and allow us to get into other topics. I appreciate your time, and I want to thank you for your hard work and this being a mission-driven place. And I want to slowly make the case that I am equally committed to your mission. My mission is that the products we approve are effective. I'm willing to take steps forward, but I'm not willing to take the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. I want us to see safe products. I want us to see some care about safety, improve about safety. I want us to say that we're going to do the right thing and not try to think too much about all the forces that push on us. We have to do the right thing for the American people. We've been doing it, and we're going to keep doing it. We're going to be having some of these debates. Last thing I'll leave you with, our similarities are far greater than our dissimilarities. Everyone in this room agrees on the core principles of science, evidence, controlled clinical studies, randomization. I think we all agree you don't need a randomized trial for a disease that affects 40 people. You might need a randomized trial if you're thinking about giving something to 100 million people. And we all agree on some core principles of evidence, and I think we should not overlook the fact that we have that that agreement. So thank you all for your time and attention. I'm going to turn it over to the procedural part of this presentation. Thanks.